And so like when we have these triggers and the escalation, it's continuing, right? Like that's all of our adrenaline and cortisol, all these like hormones that are screaming like fight, flight, freeze, fawn/appease, however you want to use that. Those are all like going off inside of our brains. And then what's happening is that just like in the hand model, right? Like we're going offline. We're not going to be operating from the part of our brain that is like reasoning and logic and is like, oh, I should do this. Because if anybody's been in a crisis, you understand that you're not thinking, oh, okay, so the first thing that I need to do is, that, you know, and you're like making a list. No.
I'm stuck right here, right now. I cannot think 5 minutes in the future.
Right. And like, I think of the same thing when people, you know, who have panic attacks and other people who've never experienced that, they're just like, just take a breath.
Have you tried calming down?
Yeah. I see that. I see memes for that all the time. Have you tried calming down? It's like, yeah.
I'm cured. Oh my goodness.
Right. Like, I could know all the coping mechanisms in the world, and it's not going to save me from having to just go through it. At that point, you just got to buckle up and move through it, you know, as safely as you can. Right.
I'm Alejandro.
I'm Mordecai.
And I'm Chrissy.
And we're Euthera.
So it's been a minute. It's been, you know, canonically like a few weeks. In reality, a few days. It's been a second since I've seen you, but I want to get to know a little bit more about y'all so that everyone can know a little bit more about us. So what's just a cool fun fact about y'all?
Well, I guess a cool fun fact is that I used to be in a belly dance troupe. So used to be out and about at Ren fairs, belly dancing with my snakes.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Cool fun fact. I lived in Japan for 2 years, and that's where I've gained my infinity, my love for sushi and especially octopus.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Mine just seems like a problem now. My fun fact was that I just have an impressive ability to lose everything. And I mean I've lost my wallet, and it was one time on the roof. Wasn't by my doing. Lost my keys. They were in the air fryer. My roommates have like the ability to help me find everything. And even they're just as impressed as I am of my ability to lose things, where I'd be ready to go and I have my keys, I'm ready. And then I have to wait like 2 minutes. And then by the 2 minutes, everything is gone.
Wow.
So it's my impressive ability, but also impressive ability to find things.
That's
way to look at it.
Yeah.
Way to look at it.
You know, my partner has the same thing where they'll ask me, hey, have you seen this? And then as soon as they ask, I don't even know where it is, but as soon as they ask, they're like, oh, there it is.
Oh,
and they find
it.
So it's good that people have their systems.
My mom scarred me for life, like doing all of that. She's like, what do I get if I find it kind of thing? So it was like, I would have to lose something, or just, it would always be like a hug. Cause I would like eat.
What a good son.
I mean, once it started turning like 13, 14 and I got an allowance, she's like, hey, pay up. So
I want that money.
Yeah. The hugs were great. Awesome.
So yeah, we're back.
Episode 4.
4.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing so good. And thanks to everybody who's been listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this episode, we're going to be talking about crisis safety planning, but I just want to recap our previous episode real quick. So we were talking a little bit about peer support, what it is, how you do it, how you don't do it, because that's also important. And so I want to transition us into today. We're going to be talking about crisis and safety planning. And so, you know, a part of peer support is that we are going to be working with people who have been through crisis, right? Or, you know, as peer supports ourselves, like we have that lived experience. We've very most likely been in crisis before. I'm sure probably every person on this planet has been. So whether you're in the position of a peer support, you're in the position of a supervisor, you're just a normal person.
Right.
This is all super relevant and super helpful. So I'm excited to get into today. And so I want to open the door by asking how y'all define crisis.
I love it.
For me, it's, I know I know when I'm in crisis, it's hard for me to define how I got there at times.
Right.
So a lot of it has to do with things that are outside of my control, or I don't know anything about what's going on.
Totally.
And as soon as like I have no control or in a place where I know nothing about, that kind of leads me into going into a crisis, or I start going into crisis because it's like I know nothing at this point. I'm at the mercy of everything else around me, and it's uncomfortable. So it's like, if once I become too uncomfortable, I go into crisis.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Very similar in the sense, right? Where it's like it can feel like you have no control. And that can even be just like, it could be the physicality, maybe like you're stuck in a situation that you can't change or anything, or it can be like that mental. So for me, it's like, I can experience crisis. How do I define it? It's tough because like the only way I can is like when I'm in it, because it's been different. Crisis has looked so different as I get older. It looks different, with my body, it looks different in work. So I think it's like that moment where I can't take it anymore. Right. Yeah. It's like all, if I was like a machine, I feel like all the parts in my body are fully exhausted. They're pumping gaskets and there's just no more. And you just feel like, man, I have zero control or any ability to change this. And so you're in a crisis. Yeah. You feel like you can't have any control.
I like what you shared too, because, well, both of you sharing about like a lack of control in the situation and kind of exceeding that. But what you shared, Chrissy, kind of made me think about how that can be true even if you're feeling, because I've had crises where the main emotion is like rage.
Right.
I'm like so angry, and then I'm moving into this crisis. But again, things are not feeling in my control, right?
Right.
Or I've had crises where I'm just feeling so hopeless and so sad and so defeated. And again, feeling like there's no control. Right.
Interesting.
And so I think we have a definition here, and it says a crisis is a situation that exceeds a person's current resources and coping mechanisms. And it can also be understood as a particular circumstance or set of circumstances that are dangerous or difficult, which I think totally ties into kind of what we were saying about it is exceeding our ability to deal with what is happening.
Right. Think about, how you can, maybe a way that globally we could all connect on understanding crisis is like, think about crisis like the pandemic, right? That put our whole country into a crisis because the country itself, if you went by this, it's like, yeah, our current resources or our current ways that we've been going all got challenged. So that kind of gives you like a global, or I guess a macro view of like crisis, or even like thinking about storms and hurricanes, right? And that's why planning is so important as well, which we'll talk about later.
So would y'all like to kind of get a little bit into the crisis cycle and kind of helping people visualize and understand crisis from that lens?
Yeah. I feel like I go through the crisis cycle differently because it is a cycle, but it is like a circle is how I was always taught it was, but it's more of like a spiral.
Yeah.
And like, no pun intended, it is a spiral for me. But I start at the baseline, which is kind of where I'm at now, right? I'm completely, I have everything that I need. Everything is cool, calm, and collected, and I am fine. The next step is when, and this is what's hard for me to recognize, is the trigger or the activator, right? The thing that's kind of setting me off. It is the calm before the storm, if you will.
Totally.
And then we get into escalation where it's kind of, I'm piling all of these things on. I'm going through everything. And then I hit crisis. The rest of the steps are what I skip, because once I go through crisis, how I deal with it is I sleep it off until it's done. So there is like the circling, like the calming down, and then there's the crash, but I feel like I just skip right to crash and then I'm like right back to where I need to be.
You're like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm not. No.
Yeah.
I'm going to sleep.
I'm going to peace out for like 10 to 12 and then I'll see y'all tomorrow. Like I give up.
You know, what's interesting about that though, Alejandro, is like, technically you're still following the remaining parts, like, the calming down, the recovery, the crash, and then back to baseline. Your body is is returning all that back when you go back to sleep. So you feel like maybe you're not going through the cycle, but technically I think by falling asleep and like giving your body that rest, you kind of are. And
I appreciate that actually a lot, but I feel like I was the wrong person to go first because I just skipped like 5, 6, 7, and 8, and I just went right to the end. So would you all care to explain what the crisis cycle is for the listeners who don't know?
Yeah. So like Alejandro shared, right, you've got that baseline, which is where I feel like all three of us are right now. Hopefully you at home are at baseline. That's that place where you are really comfortable, you know, you're having a great day. Ways that I feel like I'm at baseline is like, you know, I'm fully smiling. You just feel good. It's a good place that you want to be.
Can I just say a little thing?
Yes.
So I just want to acknowledge too that we serve a lot of people who have very different backgrounds
That's true,
and things too. And so what might be your baseline or my baseline may not be their baseline because their baseline might be a constant state of anxiety or, you know, rumination, things like that. So
that's so true. And what that makes me think about, just because I just recently had a discussion in a different meeting where we were talking about youth who experience houselessness, right? And the fact that for them, a baseline could be that, right? That your baseline is this anxious, I'm outside, right? And so it's like, that's very good. And thank you for calling that in, because my baseline could look different than anyone's baseline. As the cycle, I guess, goes forward, the thing that kind of brings us into a crisis are these activators, or another word is trigger. Again, crisis looks so different for everyone. So this could look vastly different for everybody. You know, for me, like just even being a woman, sometimes a trigger can be it's late at night and I have to walk to my car by myself, feeling really unsafe, feeling scared, right? And that could be a trigger. And then the next one, so there's 8 pieces to the cycle that we're kind of calling out is escalation. So does anybody else? I want to make sure I'm not just okay.
I can share. Yeah. So like escalation is pretty much like, let's say you have this trigger, you have this activator, and it keeps persisting. Right. So maybe it's a disagreement with somebody, and the disagreement just keeps escalating, and you're not able to take space. You're not able to separate yourself from it to cool down, and so you're moving into escalation. I did want to make a little note too that when we think about like how do we even get out of the crisis cycle? How do we remove ourselves even from this? Because nobody wants to go through this, right? Is like, at what point do we need to be adding in the coping strategies, the coping skills?
Okay.
So
I feel like it definitely happened. So like once you're activated or feeling, you know, triggered, if you have been shown to recognize that in your body, right? Whether that's my cheeks are getting hot, my hands are getting sweaty, mom's spaghetti. No, but you know, you start to recognize like those things. Then that's where planning, which I hope we talk about, that's where planning and being able to recognize, here's where I can start to cope. I know I need to take a step away. I know I need to breathe. I know I need to take a walk, whatever it might be. But I think crisis happens because the coping either isn't meeting the need or you're unable to. Like how you were just saying, like if everything keeps happening all at once, no one like if it's an argument, for example, and no one lets you go to the next room, then it escalates.
So bringing in coping skills that could work, or separating ourselves from the activator at around like that initial time when we're first noticing it, that's like the best. That's a prime time.
In my opinion, yeah.
All right. So then we have escalation, which means that we just kind of keep going up and through this, and we keep getting more dysregulated.
Right.
I think now could be an excellent time. Alejandro, would you want to maybe share a little bit about like the flip your lid thing?
Ooh, good.
Yeah. So there is the hand model, if we will, and there it kind of looks like a fist. And how it is there is the like fires the synapses once I'm getting triggered, right? And then I'm getting escalated, and it's these things that keep happening, right? And this would be your frontal cortex, and this would be your amygdala. And then these are what fires all of the things in your brain that kind of says fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes. Yeah.
So when we're going through these crises and these escalations, it's not necessarily happening all at once. It's a gradual thing. So it's like escalation, trigger, escalation, a little bit more. I'm getting, and for me personally, it would be out of control. And then boom, the lid gets popped. And I'm just like, I'm so burnt out. I'm freaking out. I'm going to have a MTD. I have no idea what to have. I don't know what to do. So that is when I kind of that is when the crash happens.
Right.
So I have no sense of kind of time. I, no pun intended for what you said, Chrissy, I lose myself from everything, right? So I lose my sense of time, awareness, and then just being. And then that's when I take my 10 to 12 hour nap.
Right.
And then I'm back to baseline at that sense. My body goes through a full shutdown and like a hard restart. Dip it in rice and then hope it gets better kind of thing.
Exactly. Well said. So yeah, I guess if you were thinking about that cycle, right, that's that flip that lid. And then that is the crisis. And one thing while you were talking, I wanted to make sure I pointed out again, because crisis looks so different. And I'm glad we're having the discussion, but there's no time. There's no like, oh, that's just going to be 15 minutes that you're in like crisis while you're in it is so dependent on what's going on in your own personal or your youth's own personal like experience. Cause like, I know I've been in crisis where it's like the whole day I felt like I was in crisis, and it wasn't until I got to my safe place that I could get back to normal. Or sometimes it's been like short. It's a short burst of, oh my God, I exceeded my ability to cope. Right. And then you calm down, you get back. So that is our next. So we've covered so far our baseline, our triggers, the escalation, which brings us into that crisis. And then after that, you do have a calming down. So for listeners at home, you can kind of picture the crisis cycle in many ways. We have circular, spiral. In this case, we're kind of thinking like a mountain, right? So the crisis is going to be that pinnacle point at the top of the mountain. Now we're coming down the mountain. We're going to have a calming down. My favorite, which is the recovery period. This is the period I feel like is when you start to love yourself. You're kind of comforting yourself back as much as you can, and with what skills you have and what you have around you. And then there will inevitably be a crash. And so this is something I want to talk about, considering what Mordecai brought into the convo. This is why sometimes for folks, crisis is consistent, because if you never get a moment to crash or to recover, your cycle keeps going. You have to have the ability. So for peer supports out there, that's what we're seeking to support. We're seeking to figure out, well, does my youth have a place to recover? Do they have a place to sleep and rest? Do they have places where they feel seen and valued and they can even reach a place so that they can get back, which is the last step of the cycle, back to baseline?
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of see it like sleep too. Like you need to have that rest so that you can like repair and replenish your body from the damage that maybe you did during the day and all that stuff. Like it's a necessary part of the process to heal and recover back from the stressor. I want to take a moment really quick just to speak to like the physiology that's happening through this, because I'm a science guy. And so like, that's my brain like works well in understanding like actually what's happening in the body here. And so like when we have these triggers and the escalation and it's continuing, right? Like that's all of our adrenaline and cortisol, all these like hormones that are screaming like fight, flight, freeze, fawn/appease, however you want to use that. Those are all like going off inside of our brains. And then what's happening is that just like in the hand model, right? Like we're going offline. We're not going to be operating from the part of our brain that is like reasoning and logic and is like, oh, I should do this. Because if anybody's been in a crisis, you understand that you're not thinking, oh, okay, so the first thing that I need to do is, that, and you're like making a list. No.
I'm stuck right here, right now. I cannot think 5 minutes in the future.
Right. And like, I think of the same thing when people, who have panic attacks and other people who've never experienced that, they're just like, just take a breath.
Have you tried calming down?
I see that. I see memes for that all the time. Have you tried calming down? It's like,
I'm cured. Oh my goodness.
Right. Like, I could know all the coping mechanisms in the world, and it's not going to save me from having to just go through it. At that point, you just got to buckle up and move through it, as safely as you can. Right.
What you're saying is so important. Because I think about like just experiences I've had or things I've witnessed, for youth. It's like, or children even, right? Think about children when they throw their what they call a tantrum. It's like, you have to let that run through. You have to and it's the same for the crisis cycle. Once we're in the crisis situation, me being a peer, it's not going to be beneficial for me to say, oh, well, let's run through, the plan that we had, or let's practice this or practice that. It's like, no, at this moment, if I'm with them, I need to provide space where I am allowing this to happen, knowing that this is not a regulated time. This is not the place where I should be trying to force them to calm down. And I think I think that's really important because, so much of what young people experience is based on their behavior. And if you really want to see crisis change, you're going to have to let the initial cycle go and then move into, okay, when that was happening, what were the things that sent you into that? And that's where that planning comes into place, which is a huge part of our job, ensuring that when regulated, when at baseline, we can talk about how did those crises happen and what do you think could have helped in that moment, right? Not that everything is, because what you're saying is 100% true, but between steps 2 and 3, where the trigger and escalation, that is somewhere where we could work to hopefully make some coping strategies that could help us.
Yeah, it's a great thing to once they've already gone into the recovery period and they've, back to baseline, and maybe this is not even that same day. Maybe this is
later.
a couple days later. Just give it time.
When it's done. At the speed of the crisis.
So then you can kind of come back and you can plan ahead for, how are we going to navigate this the next time? So that way, I can support you the best and you can feel like you have the tools to move through this. And so I think this actually is a perfect time to kind of segue into the safety planning aspect, because I know a lot of peer supports have to come up with not only maybe a safety plan for themselves as they navigate the work that they do, but also with their youth, and their youth are being asked to do that all the time. So
exactly. So for folks who have not gone through peer delivered services training at Youthera, we provide Peer Plus, and we have all of our peers go ahead and create a safety plan in the beginning. It's a simple one, but it's one to kind of get you thinking about it. So if you're at home and you have never done a safety plan, be sure to look on our Discord. We're going to have safety plan templates dropped in there, but maybe consider filling your own out and then listen to this next section. So a safety plan, just to give you the brass tacks, like what has to be on there, right? Safety plans are created hopefully to make it so that what we're kind of discussing already is so that these crises, when we are triggered, that's where we can recognize, my lid's, I have a potential to flip my lid offline. I have a potential to hit crisis. So safety planning is something that helps a young person or anybody who's really wanting to have a plan prevent that, hopefully, right? It doesn't always work, but you're hoping that by strategizing, it works. So we want to have, you routinely on a crisis and safety plan, you want some background information. So that's going to look like, what is background information? It's going to look like medication you might take or that youth might take. It's going to look like if there's specific. So for example, I would be more in crisis if someone called me my legal first name while I was in it. So it's like a background information would say only, do refer to her as Chrissy, right? Use my pronouns, refer to me as I need. So that could be some background context. We're going to have on there the anticipated triggers. So that's a big part of our work, is talking about what were the triggers that you went through and how do you recognize those. So I think in Peer Plus, we put on there, I think in the parentheses under it, it says how do you recognize this, or how does this show up in your body?
Right. What does that feel like?
Yeah. When I'm going through crisis, where do I feel it?
Where do I feel it? Right. Because that's stuff, like you said, how do you say it?
Physiologically,
it shows up in the body. It's not just only a mental thing. It's like your body will react. Other things you'll see on a safety plan is going to be warning signs. So again, showing up. interventions to try and things to avoid, because we know that when we're in crisis, I mean, there's some things like, for example, if you call me my legal first name, that's going to send me even further. So let's put that on, don't do that, and know those things. So a big part of our work is having those discussions with the youth so that we can identify these and get these on a plan. So should they be in crisis, they can refer to it themselves. And sometimes it's even for others. Should they find the young person in crisis, they can look at the plan and know how to respond as well. And then the plan itself will be in there. So we can talk a little bit more about that together.
Something that I noticed we have crisis safety planning sheets that we made up at Youth Era some time ago. And one of the things that I noticed on there that I'd never seen on any other safety plan that I had prior to this was kind of sharing about like the person's like strengths and like the things that are like, I don't know, like good about the person.
I love that.
It's so hard to think about what makes you a good person when you maybe are feeling like at your worst, and you want to like tear yourself down and stuff. So to like have that kind of already there, it's like, I don't know, just super sweet, because there's no way my brain is going to be thinking of that when I'm in crisis. So
yeah, I think that's really strength based, actually.
I do have a question that is like kind of big. With the creation of the safety plan, right? Is it just one and done? Like, is it just like, I know that it's going to work and it's fine, but what happens when it doesn't? Right?
That's a good question. Part of this, like, no, right? Like it does evolve over time because people learn new things about themselves and what works and what doesn't. And that's got to be figured out. But, something I want to talk about briefly is that some people, they're going to fill this paper out and then they're never going to look at it again because that just isn't what does it for them,
right.
So I've talked a lot with the youth that I work with about, all right, how are you going to be able to like keep this with you? Or how are we going to be able to like help you remember these things? And so sometimes we'll do activities where through different like coping skills or through different things, they're adding pictures to it. So that way it's more of like a visual thing, or, suggesting making like a collage of like their safety plan, but through like images or colors, things like that is really going to speak to them in a different way. So that way it doesn't look so clinical to have their safety plan hanging up on their wall.
Yeah. Huge point. Another part that's like really important, I feel. So I love, we were just talking about, but it's like ensuring that plan is going to be used. So in my personal experience alone, like having a crisis and safety plan, I felt like it was created for me. I didn't feel like it was with me. And I definitely felt like it was in words and jargon that I didn't even understand. Like this came from a clinical office and it's like, this is what you will do when crisis happens. The truth is like, no. And I've even had a youth that I've supported be like, there's just no way I'm going to pull out, right? Like this 2-page stapled document and be like, what am I going to do in crisis right now? Right.
Oh, I'm in this section.
Yeah,
I must be doing
here I
this
am.
one.
Yeah. So it's very, very, very realistic. And those are kind of the experiences that our youth go through, or we can go through ourselves. So finding a way as a peer to ask questions like, hey, tell me for real, like scale of 1 to 10, 10 being I love this plan, 1 being never going to use it. How do you feel about it? And that's a great way to kind of discern. And that's a huge part of our work, is to create with them a plan that's actually going to be something they try. Not that it's always going to work. And I feel like we should normalize that, because crisis happens. It happens for every single person. Nobody is exempt from experiencing it. So I just really want to normalize that too.
I want to say one more thing.
Oh, yes, please do.
It's just the like emphasis that this is a living document. It's not going to be a one and done thing. It like Mordecai said it, you're constantly learning things about yourself. Yeah. So what worked for me yesterday, or the interests that I have yesterday, doesn't mean that that's going to be the interests or things that work for me tomorrow.
Facts.
And it's not necessarily that it needs to go into the plan, right? But keep it locked in your brain for like a little bit to be like, this brings me joy, or this is something that works for me at this time when I'm going through this type of crisis. When I'm going through another type of crisis, it can be totally different. Like sleeping and driving, don't do those at the same time. Both of those things work for me, but it's dependent on the crisis that I go through.
Yeah, 100%.
That's a good point.
100%.
So I would love if we could maybe share, because, right, we're all people with lived experience.
Yes.
So how would y'all suggest to other peer supports who are supporting people going through crisis, how to navigate if they notice themselves starting to escalate, or what are some things that they can do to help keep themselves at baseline in supporting somebody in crisis?
Yeah, because we share similar lived experiences to those we're serving, this is a reality. So I also want to normalize it too. I think definitely for our newer peers out there, this is a great opportunity for you to begin to think, what type of training have I gone through? And how do I take care of myself? How do I, whether it's journaling or whatever, how am I making sure that I'm routinely releasing things I'm going through and I'm not bottling it all up? That's just so important, and it's going to help you. So when these times happen, if you find that you're escalating, which I've experienced it myself, there was a youth I was supporting. They had very, very, like literally similar lived experience to me. And when I was witnessing them kind of going through their own, I could feel myself. It was almost like, it wasn't, but it was similar to vicarious trauma, where I could literally, I felt like I could literally feel what they were feeling. And it was, I could feel my hands getting sweaty. I could feel for me, my cheeks will get extremely red. And it's almost like I can feel myself boiling, like I'm going to boil over. So because though I've had routine training, routine coaching, when it happens for me, I'm able to recognize it. And so I will tell my youth, like, I'm with you here in this moment, and I'm not afraid to also express and model to them what it looks like. I just need to take a quick moment. I'm going to just step outside. I just need to breathe. And then I will naturally follow things that I know help me safety plan, right? So I know for me, it's calling a partner or texting them, having them remind me of things. I'm a words of affirmation. So knowing your love languages, will be in our next episode, but knowing your love languages is really helpful, because then it can help you get back to baseline, right? So recognizing, and I think training and coaching in the upfront for our peers out there is what's going to help you should this happen, or should you feel like you're going to experience crisis with your youth.
And I think recognizing that is half of the battle.
Yes.
Right. Because there are going to be times where you're not even going to realize. There have been times where I haven't even realized, like, oh, I am going into a crisis. And I feel bad. I will say, I feel bad for being like, hey, I got to take a break kind of thing.
I agree. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it is so important, because it ensures the safety of not only the youth at the end of the day, but it ensures the safety of yourself. Yes. And it's hard to pour from an empty cup. And if your cup is drained, you are not going to be able to help anybody. Mm-hmm. So really relying, I'm the same as Chrissy, relying on my supports to be like, hey, I'm going through this right now. Can you be there to support me in like 30 to 45? Right. And it's kind of giving myself that safety net so I can help the youth that I need to help, but I have the measures to help me afterwards.
This really so this is going to go into our next episode, but I think this really just highlights the importance of also knowing what you need to take care of yourself, so that you can fill your cup. So that way you can, be resourceful when that is happening. If that's talking to a peer, like a coworker, or talking to your supervisor, or you know that there are certain things that you can do, like taking space, asking for, some time with this person, whatever it is. Like, you've already kind of done that work on your own to then bring that into the space, to then honor yourself, and then also like model that for the people that we're working with, which is so important, because they might think, oh, I can't take a break, I can't leave. because I have to be in this one-on-one or something.
Right.
But actually, no, we can. Like, there's nobody that's saying you have to be here, right? In fact, it's healthy to take a break.
And I think that's how I remind myself that it's okay. Is that I am truly leading by example, like asking for breaks, giving yourself that grace to kind of be like, pause. I need to just sit and not think or think whatever it needs to be, and then set up a kind of safety measure for later in the future. And that is, it kind of takes the pause and gets me out of the right here, right now, and allows me to have that future thinking so I can kind of get out of the headspace that I am currently in.
Agreed. One thing that's just coming to my mind, and so I want to make sure I honor it, is, like we said, that can feel bad to say, okay, because your youth is like literally in the moment, right? And then you're feeling like, oh shit, now I'm going through the moment. So honoring that if you feel in that time that you didn't take a break, right? And you kept on staying there with the youth, it's important that afterwards you find a way to debrief, talk to someone, particularly if you are a youth peer support now, that you debrief that with the supervisor, find a way, because you don't want to bottle that. You want to release that and talk about it and get the support that you need. And I just wanted to point out the supervision aspect. That's what supervisors are there for. That's what your leaders are there for. Your trainers, that's what they're there for. So utilize your resource and don't deal with it just solo or alone.
Yeah. Kind of calls back to what you're saying earlier about routinely releasing things, which I think that is so important, that we're not holding, because we can hold on to a lot of stories and it can weigh on us.
Yeah.
So, perfect. So we talked a little bit about safety plans, and how they like help the youth. How do they help us as the peer support? So maybe speak to that a little bit. Like why does that create safety for us too?
Well, I think planning in general, I like to really bring things to the general level. So think about, like, even in your homes, many of us probably don't, but we should. We should have plans to prep us. So for example, we're out here in the Pacific Northwest. Like, we have our cities have plans for tsunamis, right? We're prepped, we're prepared. It should be a normalized thing to have plans to prevent or to help us should stuff hit the fan, because it's just a reality. It's what happens, and crisis is just a part of the process for us being so human. And so for me, I feel like when planning with youth, the way that it benefits me is for sure that I feel like I've offered something to this youth, or I've shared experience, or even put them in the power seat to plan for themselves, whereas maybe other times they received a plan that was for them. So that feels good. And then for me, when I safety plan for myself, sorry, I'm answering doubly, but when I plan for myself, it also puts me back in check to remember, I'm human. Even as a peer, I'm going to experience things too. And so I want to be able to model, and I want to be able to have the lived experience of what it feels like to create a safety plan, because it can feel a little awkward. You're basically prepping for stuff hitting the fan. So it's like, okay, I have to really think about this. But so those are the two ways I find it kind of benefits me, or I benefit the process, I guess. Alejandro?
For me, I am a little thief, quite honestly. So I made my crisis and safety plan. And then when I work with youth and work through them of like, hey, what works for you? Who do you rely on when you need help? Who are you, like, where do you feel it? What do you feel? How are we feeling? I sometimes steal their answers. I'm like, oh man, that's a really good idea. I'm going to try and steal that. I'm just going to jot that down really quick. And honestly, it's a different perspective, because when I am in crisis, I go to what I know and I get that tunnel vision. So when I help other people go through their form of crisis or their crisis and safety plan, it broadens my lens and it really relieves that tunnel vision that I get. And I see that there are other things that I can do and that I can pull from to support me. Video games, have not really played as many video games as I have recently, but a youth was just like, I play a racing game because I love cars. And I was like, I like racing games, so I'll try that out. And if I love driving when I really need to relax. That has helped me exponentially. I shout out to that youth. But I pull from things that are just, it's a different perspective that I have. And then the things that I have from my perspective are just like, hey, you can try this. You don't have to do it. In no way, shape, or form do you have to do it. The crisis and safety plan should be in the individual's language, and also it should be written by them. It shouldn't be written by anyone else. However, you can be like, try it out. Why not? Throw it on the wall, see what sticks. Yeah.
I like that. Because it's got to have like the youth's buy-in. Otherwise, like, what's the point of even doing it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, I loved what you shared about like stealing things from them, because like what that points to is that like we are learning from each other, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not just a one-way street where I'm teaching you all the things and, you know, highlighting that power thing, but which I feel like I come back to every single episode, but it's just because like it is so important that, you know, you see that just the humanness of each other, that I'm learning just as much from you as you're learning from me. And like, this is a beautiful opportunity for us both,
Right.
you know? Cool.
I love that. Yeah.
And I love too that you save a lot of gas money when you just play video games and stuff.
If I'm running low, I'm like, I'm just going to put on this racing game and I'm going to do not very well because I'm not very competitive, but I'm going to cruise for a little bit.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. That was like my favorite part of Grand Theft Auto. Literally just driving.
Just abiding the laws.
Stopping. Yeah. It was a joy. So Mordecai, I have a question kind of for you. So for folks, I think Mordecai shared on episode 1 that Mordecai had been a peer support that really helped like virtually and like responded. So how do you recognize crisis when you aren't face to face? Like, have you ever experienced that? What was that like?
Yeah. So, all right. Like every youth is different, right? So it's going to be very individualized.
Very sure.
So I have some youth that will communicate that they're moving into crisis. I can just see by the way that they're typing out their responses. Sometimes they get very like simplistic kind of conversation, like very short like answers or responses kind of clipped because they're feeling like overwhelmed at this point.
Right.
Or maybe they're no longer even communicating verbally and they're just sharing GIFs or things like that that are like, you know, sad or that communicate like what they're actually feeling, or emojis. Sometimes I can see that in the way that like I have some youth who will share, kind of do like an info dump more or less, but I can tell based on like what they're saying, what is happening. And sometimes it can be really scary because sometimes we'll be having these conversations and then all of a sudden they just dip out and then I don't hear from them and then I get really scared because I don't know what's happening on the other side of that screen.
Right.
And so that is something that, you know, after it's happened with somebody that we might have a conversation later and be like, hey, so I was like really worried about you because you just like disappeared. And they're like, I'm sorry, like I just fell asleep, you know, like pulled an Alejandro.
Maybe
Guilty of doing
right?
it. Also guilty of doing that.
And so that's just like a thing for us to have a conversation about. And we can check in about it later, or they can share like, I have to go or whatever. So that way I'm a little bit more in the loop of what's going on, but it does look different for everybody. Sometimes it can, you know, even with the crisis cycle, we were talking about how like, there's no like real set points for time of like how long a certain thing is going to last. Right. And I have some youth who will move through like the trigger and escalation to the crisis, you know, very quickly. There's not a whole lot of space to stop and find the trigger. Whereas others, it's a bit more gradual. And so it's really about knowing your youth and knowing the ways in which they communicate. A lot of it, it just comes down to the rapport. Because if it's a brand new person, it can be a lot harder to identify for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Okay. Well, I was going to ask a different question, but I kind of feel in my heart there's a different. So what would we, for our listeners, what would we want to say is like a key takeaway if they were going to support a youth and the youth? So say like Mordecai saying like it's a new, you don't have a lot of rapport, but this youth is in crisis. what would be a key thing that we want to tell these peer supports out here listening to us as a kind of like a key of advice or a key of like, just remember this?
Ooh, okay. Don't downplay their feelings.
Oof. Yeah. There you go.
Everyone goes through crisis differently. Everyone experiences everything differently. Some people are going to feel more about a certain thing than others, and their experiences are their own. So don't downplay that. They're going through it. We're here to support them through that. Also, when making a crisis and safety plan, those things are able to fail. People don't fail. The plans fail. So with that, once the crisis is over, reevaluate the plans, see what worked, see what didn't, revise and edit, and then try to make it as good as it would work for the next time.
I love that.
So a key takeaway for supporting someone in crisis, I feel like, I mean, there's so much that I want to say, but I think part of it is like the de-escalation aspect of it, in which like we don't want to like fuel the fire. And so, you know, I just want to like suggest, like, I normally preach curiosity. I normally preach like, be curious, ask questions. If somebody's in a crisis, do not ask questions.
Yeah.
Like, right. We just got to be with them and let them know that you're here. And if you already have rapport built with this person, then you can kind of bring in certain things that you know might be comforting for them. And maybe that's like turning off these really bright fluorescent lights or something so that we're creating a safer space for them. Or maybe we're helping to remove them from overwhelming sounds or thing that has been triggering them, right? So finding ways to move towards de-escalation rather than that person having to sit in that discomfort for however long until they can get out of that headspace.
Absolutely.
To start meeting those needs themselves.
Well said, both of you. I love that. My takeaway would be something that I feel like I want all of us to carry as peers is like, recognize that you're human, and like witnessing or supporting someone going through such a hard time or a hard moment is going to impact you, and that is okay. And get comfortable with that, recognizing that that's a part of the work, and know that your response and your ability to show up is awesome. And because I see a lot of peers, like afterwards, they just beat themselves up. They're like, I didn't do this right. I didn't do this. I should have done this. And I just think like, no, it's okay. The way that you're going to show up and the way that it happens, like Alejandro was just sharing, like plans fail, you are not failing. It's just like re-strategize, and the next time something happens, it's going to get better, and just have grace with yourself, I guess is what I would say.
I love that. Yes.
I have one more thing.
Okay.
Avoid using the language, I know. I know what you're feeling.
Oof, right.
I know what you're going through.
It's so true. I know exactly how you feel.
No, you don't.
I know.
Otherwise, you'd be going through this with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? That's so true.
So
That's a really good
That's
point.
a really good tip. Yeah.
I understand, because you're going off of your lived experience. Saying I understand or I empathize what you're feeling.
Or I want to understand.
Yeah. It's a lot of that. I don't want to say like, I don't want to put myself in your shoes. Your shoes are your shoes. They don't fit me.
Yeah.
So
I like that. Yeah. You got a lot of good, like little snippets, little sayings. So something that we made some like notes about that I just want to kind of address too, is that when it comes to crisis and the crisis cycle, safety planning, one, like, don't make promises that you can't keep. It's very tempting to want to say that you'll always be there for somebody, and that is so unrealistic.
Or even to say like, this is going to get better.
I promise everything's going to be okay.
It's like, don't say that, because you don't know.
Oh, yeah.
It's out of my control.
Yeah.
So, right, we're not making promises that we can't keep. And also, like, sometimes we have to do hard things. Even if there is a risk of it, breaking the rapport that we have with our youth, it is still really important that we do those things. And one of those is sometimes like having to make a wellness check or call for a wellness check on a person, or having to navigate suicidality with our people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
But
safety first.
Safety
It's always going to be our
comes
first priority.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot was talked about today. It was a handful. We kind of went all over the web of crisis and safety planning. First off, of just the importance of what it is, what the crisis cycle is, going through everything, how it can look different for everyone, how safety is extremely important, and it's safety over trust always, right? Because I'd rather you be mad at me today than not see you tomorrow.
Right.
And also just noticing how we as peer supports in different mediums, whether it be in person or online, we navigate how crisis can look differently for everybody. And when making these plans, it is a living document. It is something that is, we're continuously learning about ourselves. So that plan is always going to change. And with all of that, it is just a huge topic of conversation to have. And it's really hard to have within like this. I mean, this was supposed to be a 30-minute episode. It's going into an hour. As you can see, we doubled the time. So it is a hard topic to have, but we enjoy having these conversations so that we can kind of make it normal, that it is okay to go through crisis. Everyone goes through crisis, but it's how and who we can rely on and what we rely on to kind of get us through this together.
I love that.
Which we'll be talking a little bit about next time.
Yeah, episode 5. We're going to touch on wellness, self-care, self-love, all the things. So super excited. In our closing, we always want to invite you to follow us on our social media
hang out.
Spaces. Yeah, come hang out. The biggest place to come and kick it is going to be Discord moving forward. So if you have a Discord, you're just going to click add friend. When you do that, you're going to type in YE Connect. You can also follow us on YouTube and Instagram. There we are at The Youth Era. And then TikTok, it's just Youth Era. So we'll have a little image that pops up if that was all too much for you to capture. We're super thankful for you listening. It's been awesome. This was episode 4, and we'll see y'all next time for episode 5.
Yep. See y'all later.
Thanks, guys.
See you in the Discord.
Bye.